So you know how sometimes on social media or notifications on your phone or laptop, and it will give you memories from 1 year ago or 2 or 5 or 10 or 12, and you can sometimes remember them, but sometimes they're just a little bit out of reach because you've done so many things in that time, and all it is now is a static photo on a screen or a small clip of a video or somebody else's memory that they've just posted and you shared without really thinking. And then there are just things that have happened to you and memories that are just a little bit out of reach, and you know things have happened, and a fleeting comment will make you want to reach in a little bit further and retrieve it. Well, I always felt a little bit cheated that those memories that were mine weren't quite accessible to me except for through other people or these static media. So I locked myself in this white room, this tiny white room with just a small window in the corner and just one plug socket and nothing else. And why? Here you ask. Well, it's because I needed a static white space so I could retrieve these memories that were mine. So I sit back and I close my eyes and drift off, reaching for different memories. When I was a small child, I used to love playing out in the garden, being all wild and seeing the plants and playing in the dirt and seeing birds and butterflies. And one day I found this big green caterpillar. And as a child I was so enchanted by the size and the colour, I picked it up and I put it in a jar. I took it inside and up to my room. And I had this doll, and I wasn't really a doll kind of child, but I was given them as gifts. And there was this doll on my bed. It was a baby doll, and I called it Christopher. And as I went up with this jar with a caterpillar inside, I saw Christopher there on my bed, and he had a little open mouth. So I opened the jar and I let the caterpillar crawl inside Christopher's mouth. And I watched it crawl in. And then I felt a little bit bad that I'd just let this caterpillar crawl into a doll's mouth, so I thought I'd best retrieve it. And I pulled off Christopher's head. Only I couldn't find the caterpillar, and I remember being so confused because the doll's head was hollow and the body was soft, so where could it possibly have gone? I looked inside the head and it wasn't there. And I looked on my bed and it wasn't there. and in Christopher's soft body, and it wasn't there. So I don't understand where the caterpillar disappeared to. But I couldn't put Christopher's head back on, so I just left it. There was this one time I thought it would be really nice to invite a friend round, just for some tea. And I don't do that very often because I don't have many friends and not that sociable, but you know, I thought I'd try and be somewhat sociable. So we set a date and she agreed to come round and did the usual thing. Thought I'd have to tidy up a bit. So I vacuumed and I dusted and I tidied my kitchen, and I thought everything looks great. You know, completely in order, just like a normal house. It looked normal to me, and I think that's probably the key word there. It looked normal to me, because there was one thing that a lot of people just wouldn't get, and that is my family jar of eyelids. You see, there's a tradition in my family that when someone dies or someone just happens to die near them, we'd just cut off their eyelids. We come prepared with the scalpel every time. And we'd cut them off and we preserve them and we put them in this jar and we just pass it on from relative to relative. And this took pride of place on a shelf. But apparently people don't really take to this so well, so I had to hide that. And all throughout that little gathering, felt a sense of dis-ease because I couldn't see my eyelids. At primary school, there were 2 cases where teachers thought it would be really fun to let all of the students know that sometimes when you see something, it's not always what it seems. So the first case of this was during assembly. And they'd invited these people in to come and stand at the front as they did, and they had these cans of dog food in front of them. And they opened them and they dug in a spoon and they started to eat. And all of the children in that assembly made noises of disgust and horrors. How can these people be eating dog food? And one of them asked if anybody would like to volunteer to come up to the front and try what they were eating. And the place felt silent, and nobody wanted to go up. Nobody. Because why would you eat dog food? Except eventually one child put up their hand and they said, I'll try. So they walked up to the front and they slowly raised this spoon to their mouth and ate it, and this look of surprise came over their face, and they said it tastes just like chocolate. And indeed it was. It was chocolate in jelly that teachers thought it would be fun to showcase and convince people that it was dog food instead. And the second case of this was a few weeks later, where it was in the classroom rather than an assembly, and the teacher had these bowls in front of her of what looked like coloured mashed potato, like red and green and blue and pink. And she wanted people to try it and then say that it tasted different, like depending on the colour. And this to the children felt simpler than the dog food trick. You know, it was mashed potato, so we'd kind of expected that each colour would have some different flavour. But instead of presenting the children with a spoon, the teacher just dipped her finger into the mashed potato and walked around, making each child lick the coloured mashed potato off her fingers. There were a few children that got to experience this, and each colour did taste just like mashed potato, and there was no difference whatsoever in any of the colours. And I know this because I happen to be one of those children. There's one time I was on a bus and I was running late, and I was going to meet my mother for lunch, which is an ordeal in itself. But the lateness added to the pressure and the stress. I eventually get there, pull up at the stop, and I hurry up the wide street to where I was supposed to meet my mother, and I see this figure waiting outside her building, and it was a figure with long dark hair and a long dark skirt and a white shirt, just as I was. And I thought with relief, oh, I'm not late, there I am. I'm there already. And I realised that no, I wasn't, because I was still on my way. I was walking along a beach with a friend, and we were just kind of aimlessly wandering over the rocks, and I was a little bit ahead of her, and we were both looking on the ground for interesting bits of rock or shell. And I found a few pieces, and I heard her scream all of a sudden, and I turned around and see what it was, and she pointed to the floor, and she picked up a piece of what she thought was quartz, and it looked very white and pink and, you know, exactly like what she thought it was. But we quickly realised it wasn't that at all, and it was bone. Piece of pig bone, and we know it was a pig bone because a little to the side was half the pig's head that had been washed up on the beach, rotting with its teeth exposed. We still took the bone home anyway. I went with a friend of mine to one of his relatives' funerals for moral support. And it was a big funeral, and there were a lot of people there, and he didn't know everyone, but this was quite common with Indian funerals, and extended family and friends of the family often turn up, even if they only knew of the person. And it seemed to be a very peaceful ceremony, with the music playing in the background, giving people time to think about their own mortality and to mourn the dead. And everybody was sitting with their thoughts when someone walked in, and they started wailing and wailing, and it was like proper funeral keening, and they just stood at the side and cried and screamed, and nobody seemed to know who they were, and they just kept giving glances at this person, not fully understanding what was happening. And then this person slowly walked down, still wailing, and threw themselves at the coffin. And they beat the sides, and they cried, and they wailed in front of everyone. And after a while, they just left. And nobody knew who they were. And my friend had no idea who they were. At university one time, I was sitting quietly with a friend in one of the gardens, and we were just generally chatting about life. And then somewhere in the distance but nearby, we hear the sound of brass instruments. And they get closer and closer. And they walk past us. A row of people playing trombones and trumpets and a tuba, just maybe about 5, 6 of them, just walking in a line, walk right past us, glancing at us very briefly, not breaking in their music for a second. And then they disappeared. We didn't know why they were there, and we didn't see them again. I went through this phase where all I wanted to eat was broken bits of china and glass. So every morning I would wake up and I would smash cups and glasses, and I would mash them for a while, until they were in fine broken pieces. And I'd pour them into a bowl, just like you would cereal. And then I would pour orange juice or black coffee over them, just like you would with cereal, and eat it, the crunchiness being so satisfying. It lasted for a few months, and then that craving disappeared. I was in Prague once with a group of friends, and we'd had dinner and we were making our way back to the hotel in the evening. We were waiting at one of the tram stops, and I saw in the bin next to it that there were perhaps a dozen or so VHS tapes just discarded and piled up. To this day, my biggest regret in life is not taking them. When I was 7, I liked to go and stand on this old tree stump in the bottom of the garden. And I used to look over the fence into next door's yard. And it was a big yard. But the house had burned down a few years back, and they didn't do anything with it. So it had just been left as burned rubble in an overgrown garden. And one day when I was looking over, I always liked to try and spot ghosts and fairies and things like that, because that was what all the childhood films that I'd seen had led me to believe that I would see. You know, all these fantastic creatures. And one day when I was looking over, I did see a creature. But it wasn't what I was expecting. I can't really describe what I saw. It was about the same size as perhaps a lion, only it was huge and it was black. And its eyes looked a cold, icy blue that eventually turned into a shining red. And its presence felt really sinister, almost supernatural. And I tried to explain to my parents what I saw, and they dismissed it, and they said it was probably a fox with mange, but it was not a fox with mange, of that I'm sure. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't what I'd hoped to see. Instead, it was just a creature that I now occasionally think about. I was on this bus coming back from market with my mum once, and on the way back we had to pass this huge roundabout, about 4 lanes, lots and lots of traffic. But there was this big underpass, and I was sat next to the window, so I had a really good view of this. And in this little bit of the underpass, there was a group of people. They were dressed quite untidily, and there were a few of them, maybe 5, 6, and about 4 men, and there was this one woman with a baby in a sling strapped to her chest, and they were all in this semicircle, and in the middle of this semicircle was a man with no legs. His wheelchair was off to the side, and in front of the people he was, I guess, breakdancing, just swinging himself around, his legless body just performing for these people who were just standing and watching him in this underpass. And then my eyes flutter open. And the room is full of colour as my memories are retrieved.